the what's called bonus ADU program came out in city of San Diego. So it's a regulation that said you're allowed 1 ADU or 2 ADUs on every property in California per state code. In city of San Diego, most properties are eligible for unlimited ADUs, up to pretty much however many you can build. And so we went into escrow on this piece of land, expecting to put 4 units on it. After about a month and a half being in escrow, and kind of reading through all the municipal code, talking to some architects and things like that, we realized we could put 8 units on it. And that was kind of this moment where I literally was just like, holy I just doubled my unit count, easily, increased the value of the property, literally just because I was like reading stuff like, oh, this is going to be a thing.
Welcome to the RealPropPro podcast, where strategy, innovation, and wealth converge to redefine real estate investing.
Hello, and welcome back to the RealPropPro podcast. I'm your host, Ian Dietler. I've been investing in real estate since 2016, working on fix and flips, JV deals, and building out training programs to help everyday people get into real estate investing. This show is about giving you the knowledge, mindset, and strategies to take your real estate journey to the next level. At RealPropPro, we're all about making real estate investing accessible. We teach people everything from tax lien and tax deed investing, creative financing, fix and flips, multifamily, and so much more. Whether you're just getting started or scaling a portfolio, our goal is to help you with the tools, training, and community you need to succeed. Today's guest is someone who has really taken a unique path into real estate investing. Brian Koons is a Marine Corps veteran who has house hacked his very first deal, a fourplex in San Diego, California, using his VA loan. That single decision not only eliminated his housing expenses, but lit the fire for his real estate career. Fast forward a few years, and Brian has become known as the Builder Brian. He's overseen more than 500 ADU projects. He has recently co-founded HK Development Group to offer full-service, white-glove development solutions. He's a leader in the ADU space, a mentor to investors, and someone who is turning California's housing shortage into an opportunity for growth. Brian, welcome to the show.
Dude, Ian, thanks for having me, man. I'm stoked to be here.
All right. We're so stoked to have you here as well. Can't wait to get into some of these topics. But before we do, we like to talk about where people were born and where they grew up.
Yeah, so I was born in Ohio, right outside of Cleveland, and I grew up there, same house, whole life, turned 18 years old. And right before that, I saw my brother join the Navy. That got me interested in that path because I had no idea what I wanted to do as an adult. And I figured that, betting the odds, I was not going to pick the right thing if I went straight to college. So I joined the Marine Corps, and that brought me over to South Carolina for a few months. Then I was in Virginia for about 6 months. And then after that, I went to North Carolina, and I was there for about 4.5 years. That was, really where I started saving money. That was, I think the big point where I kind of set myself up for in 2019. I came to San Diego and heard about this term called house hacking. A lot of stars aligned with COVID and my job at the time, and I was able to get into a house hack, and then from there had a little bit of money saved up because with your VA loan you don't put any money down on the house, and found out after I bought it what debt to income ratio was, and figured out I didn't qualify for a thing, and the only logical explanation was to buy some land, and the rest is history for how I got into real estate development.
Great. I'd love to get into that story a little bit more, but before we do, to maybe some of the newer listeners, can you explain to them what a house hack is and how that works?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a house hack at a fundamental level is purchasing a property, leveraging an owner-occupied loan, which tends to be a lower down payment loan, and whatever space you aren't actively living in, you rent out in order to offset and sometimes completely pay for the mortgage and potentially pay you a little bit more in rent. So in my situation, it was a 4-unit property. I rented out the additional 3 units in the property, and then also the additional 2 bedrooms that I had in my unit. So I was living in a tiny, 1 out of 12 bedrooms in the property, and everything else was rented out, and I was able to make some money while I was living there.
Awesome. What was the moment that you knew that you wanted to go all in on real estate investing?
So when I came over to San Diego, so I was a drill instructor. That's what brought me over to San Diego. So the guy who just yells at people all day. And at drill instructors school, they had somebody who came and taught us about the VA loan. It was an educational platform. And obviously the follow on for him was, hey, by the way, I have a brokerage, a lending company, et cetera, et cetera. So if, as you drill instructors are moving to San Diego, if you need somebody to help you buy a house, whatever, obviously he was able to help out with that. For me, because of my rank, I wasn't able to actually leverage the housing allowance that you get. And so it didn't make sense for me to buy a home at the time. But he had this like little tiny blurb about how you can make $100,000 in 3 years. That was the whole thing, right? And he talks about debt pay down, appreciation, and tax benefits of selling. So all of those things, you add them up, and it's arguably more than that in San Diego in most cases. But that was this little blurb where I was like, oh shit, that makes sense. Like that those numbers make sense. Nothing there seems scammy. And so it put this idea in my head. And then about a year later was when COVID started. And so I had this kind of idea planned the whole time that like eventually that was going to be the path. It made sense. I had some money saved up. It just wasn't the right time with being a drill instructor. It's very time intensive. And then when COVID happened, it was, when you're actively a drill instructor, you're working 7 days a week, 20 to 24 hours a day, every single day. Like without stop, you get sent home on some evenings every once in a while, and that's about all the time you have to yourself. And then you're back in the 4 or 4 in the morning to get back on the boys. And when COVID happened, I got sent to do a supplementary job to being a drill instructor that kind of assisted. So essentially, I was the drill instructor that babysat recruits while they were getting quarantined prior to them actually starting boot camp. And what that did was twofold. So number one, we actually got kicked off base. So we went from living in the barracks to having to go live out in town because they needed our barracks rooms to quarantine recruits. So all of a sudden I got an increase in housing allowance. At the same time, I was able to do this job that was significantly less intensive and less time consuming. So all of a sudden I had a lot more time. So I decided, that was middle of April. They told us, hey, like, we need you out of the barracks by April 23rd. So we had about a week to find somewhere to live. And from there, about a week or two of kind of getting settled and everything. And then it was about middle of May when I decided, okay, cool. Like I'm ready to start, actively looking. And then I went to one on Bigger Pockets. At that point, I'd read 3 books. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. Obviously, everyone says that that's like the book to read. Brandon Turner's book on rental property investing, and then The House Hack Strategy by Craig Kurlop. All 3 of those books kind of, I was like, okay, cool. I understand what I want to do now. Reached out to somebody on Bigger Pockets that's in San Diego. He had the top reviews, of everyone. He was an agent. It was super helpful. He shared a couple like webinars that his broker did teaching, some really, really intense topics that I didn't really understand were so valuable at the time. But he was teaching about underwriting. He was teaching about zoning. He was teaching about the data points of San Diego. And that gave me the confidence very quickly to be like, okay, cool. I understand how to underwrite now. And so got pre-approved with a lender and started underwriting deals. I started, looking for the ideal, the iconic duplex that I can live in one, rent out the other. And it wasn't penciling how I wanted to. And so I started looking at some triplexes, and those started to make a little bit more sense. I started, I threw in 1 or 2 offers on those. And as I was going, I started realizing like, oh, hey, like 4-unit properties make more sense. And it was just this thing where I was like, it's almost like you're buying in bulk. The more units you buy, the more it cash flows. And so I started looking for 4 units, put in about 8 to 10 offers over the next week or two. And June 5th, I was in escrow on the 4-unit that I still own today. So it was a pretty quick experience between, getting ready to rip it and ripping it.
Nice. I love that you did your homework and you took action. I think that's so important for our listeners to hear. And I really like that you went over a lot of that process that, you went through to gain the knowledge, do the market research, do the research in running the numbers, all of that stuff so important. What was your mindset going into this house hack, knowing that you were going to be a landlord?
So my mindset was very different than I think my parents was at the time. They grew up in Ohio, and so the number on the property. So I bought it for like 1.2, and that was a very big number to most people.
Yeah.
And so when I went into it, I was very blissfully ignorant. I think number one, I had some money saved up. I wasn't putting every dime that I had into the property, and I feel confident saying that I was very pragmatic, very objective with it. And that's kind of why I was so easily able to transition from a duplex to 4 units, because honestly, I didn't really give a shit about the price. I cared about the numbers and the percentages that it was included. And because of COVID and all of the things, the increased income and the interest rates at the time going down, pretty much anything that I underwrote that made sense to me penciled from the lender's perspective, which was really, I think validating for me in my underwriting journey. And that's, progressed a lot since then. But it was also very validating. I'm like, if the lender's willing to lend on this, it probably makes sense. So my mindset, I was very confident going into it. And then the one that I ended up going into was more or less a flip of a 4 unit property. And they had just recently gotten in 3 tenants in the 3 units that I wasn't going to be living in. So, you don't know what you don't know. I ended up going through a whole eviction on one of those within like the first 6 months, which was exciting. Went in, I'm like, okay, cool. Like they already got tenants in. So the whole like, oh, well, how do you know you're going to be able to rent it out and you're going to have to pay for vacant units? I'm like, I already rented out, dude. Like then the property or the unit that I was living in, I had both of the bedrooms rented out within a week of moving in. So it wasn't, San Diego at the time was, I think, a pretty hot market. It still is for rentals, but at the time, I think that I had it priced right. I included utilities. So I kind of understood those triggers that attracted a certain tenant base at that time. And so it was a pretty easy process. I had a couple, bedroom or roommate turnovers, but over the course of a few years, but it was good. I wasn't too worried about any of it. And I kind of, went into the fire and learned on the way down. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a thing now. I didn't know that. And you learn as you go.
So did you have different tenants in each of the units? And on top of that, you also rented out a couple of the rooms in the unit that you lived in?
I did, yeah. So I inherited 3 tenants. So that's when you buy a property with existing tenants. And then every unit was a 3-bedroom. So then on my unit, I lived in 1 unit, or lived in 1 bedroom. Then I rented out the other 2. At the most I had was 2 in 1 bedroom and then 1 in the other. So we had a total of 4 people at one time at the most. And yeah, I maxed it out as long as I lived there. Once I moved out, so I moved out about a little over 2 years after I moved in. And as those tenants moved out, I continued to, or I stopped renting out by the room, turned it into an Airbnb for a little while. Found out that, once the COVID spike changed, you actually had to be good at Airbnb, and that's not where my strong suits lied. So I turned it into a long term, and I've never been happier with it since.
Nice. Now, have you had to deal with any problem tenants during that journey?
I definitely have had my fair share. So I think the biggest one is one of the tenants that I inherited. They were, supposedly recovering veterans from drug addiction, and inherited them. They're great. They were totally fine. It's all alleged. I can't prove any of this, so grain of salt on all of it. But one of the tenants said, "Hey, my roommate is using again. I can't live there, so I'm going to move out." And oh, by the way, he was the one who was paying the rent. So the one that still lived there, we said, "Hey, like your roommate was the one paying the rent. Do you mind moving out as well?" And the guy said, "Sure." And this was in September of 2020, and he said, "Yeah, sure." And he ended up moving. We were going to have him move out at the end of October. Got to the end of October, he said, "Hey, I can't find somewhere to live. By the way, I have COVID now." And luckily, because we have this like prior engagement where he said he was going to move out, we were able to go through the eviction process. During that time period, he started housing, shall we say, more roommates than he should have from across the street. Where the property's at, there's a little bit of homeless issues around the area. So at one point, I'd called the police because they were changing the locks on the door. There's a whole side story of this, but yeah, had a good amount of issues as they were living there. And at one point they were changing the locks on the door. I was coming home from work, which at the time was a drill instructor, so didn't always come home in the best mood, as I was tired and hungry and all those things. And the one day I just was over it. I called the cops, and they pulled out like 12 people against the fence at one point, and went in, and they then came up to my unit. Just I was like, thanks for letting them know that I'm the one who called. But they said, hey, like, we did find like, heroin and other drug paraphernalia inside of the unit, but because it's COVID, we can't arrest anyone for drugs. So sorry, bye. And they just like left. Eventually, was able to, like I said, October to about February, they came in, sheriff came and said, hey, we're here for a court-ordered eviction, grab your stuff. And then he literally grabbed a backpack, walked across the street, and sat down on the street. So that was probably one of
into his new home.
Exactly. So that was definitely one of the issues I had on the 4 unit. I've had on some of our development projects some other pretty issues that I've now learned are not worth my time anymore. But yeah, that was one of the fun ones for sure, because I was actively living there.
Actually, yeah, I just saw a social media post. I think you posted it today, and so I'm going to kind of bring it up because I thought it was pretty interesting. You were talking about how you and your partners are just going around making longer and longer checklists as you go. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that one was on one of our development projects. It was actually an inspector that just on the wrong side of the bed today, and we had a little piece of stucco that was ripped out, and essentially we didn't have a test for an asbestos test on it, so we have to essentially now they assume that the entire property has asbestos, so we have to remediate the entire house and all of the units that we're building in the backyard, which is going to to the tune of like $14,000, $500 fine on top of it. And now he essentially just pissed off, and it was just because the property was built before 1979 or something like that. And so now we had to get that tested, but no one ever told us that. To go a little bit inside of your point of checklists, it was definitely that one was like arguably not bad at all compared to some of these other issues that we've had. But yeah, it's definitely some things like boarding up, for example, the windows when you buy a new property that's going to be vacant for a while. I think it's pretty important. I had a property that we were building. We were turning 2 units into 6 units, and we did that without permits. It was super hindsight, realized that we should have gotten the permits before we did it, not after we did it. And because we did that, we had to keep it vacant for a few months. And we ended up having quite a few homeless people try and live there rent-free for a little while. And yeah, it's something that you learn over time, and you learn some of the things to avoid on certain projects. So
nice. Well, thanks for sharing those stories. I know it's not always wins and beautiful times in real estate investing. There's a lot of downsides and a lot of things that you have to learn from. Kind of switching gears a little bit, you've become the go-to voice on ADUs in your local market. Can you talk about how you got started into ADUs and what made that switch in your head to be like, oh, this is really what I need to be focusing on?
yeah, so going back to when I bought my 4 unit, obviously we talked very briefly about debt to income ratio, so being able to qualify for a property. I was still in the military at the time, maxed out my DTI buying the 4-plex, and from there, I couldn't afford anything, and I was still very new in the space, and so I didn't really have all the knowledge of everything at my fingertips available in my head. But just going to meetups, there was this guy who started talking about this thing called ADUs, and it really functionally made sense to me, very similar to how making $100,000 in 3 years made sense. He was like, hey, like every properties can have this thing now. You build at 300, you sell at 700 a square foot. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. San Diego is a super expensive market. And that kind of like sparked this interest in me in, probably August, September. And I was, kind of like figuring out like, okay, cool. Like, talking to my buddy about it. And we went to a meetup in November, I think. I met this other guy, and we all kind of sat down and we were like, yeah, we all kind of want to do this ADU thing or this development thing. One of the guy's dads was a contractor, and so we ended up deciding that we wanted to buy something together, buying some land or a development opportunity. And we were in escrow on this piece of land. It was vacant land. It wasn't raw land. So it already had existing utilities on it because there was an existing house, but they demoed the house on it, which in hindsight was actually a super valuable thing. And that was in December of 2020. So literally like the month after we met, we decided to partner on something, which in hindsight worked out extremely well for what it could have when you do partnerships that quickly. And that same month that we got into escrow, the what's called bonus ADU program came out in city of San Diego. So it's a regulation that said, hey, if you're allowed one ADU or two ADUs on every property in California per state code, in city of San Diego, most properties are eligible for unlimited ADUs up to pretty much however many you can build in whatever unit mix, etc. And so we went into escrow on this piece of land expecting to put 4 units on it. After about a month and a half being in escrow and kind of reading through all the municipal code, all the, talking to some architects and things like that, we realized we could put 8 units on it. And that was kind of this moment where I literally was just like, holy shit. I just doubled my unit count, easily, increased the value of the property, literally just because I was like reading stuff. And I realized I'm like, oh yeah, you can do this thing. And if you include this thing as well, you can leverage this piece of the municipal code. And yeah, all of a sudden we were able to put a lot of units on. And by doing that, like I said, I read just a bunch of stuff. It was just free information online. And it just blew my mind how, I was like, I saw the writing on the wall. I'm like, oh, this is going to be a thing. And it's really funny because over the next 2, 3, 4 years, it started getting trendier and trendier, especially in California or especially in San Diego because of this bonus ADU program. That was, 2022 is when I started working at this company that I was working at for a few years. And yeah, for the first couple of years, I felt like a Jehovah's Witness. I felt like I was just preaching the gospel and people were like, what's this thing called ADUs? And I was just like, I'm like, oh yeah, like dude, you can do it to your property. Like it's awesome. And yeah, just kind of functionally became the ADU guy, the initial guy that was talking to me or that kind of like taught me that very first time. He was really good at business development and marketing. So I saw him at a ton of meetups. He was teaching a bunch of classes, and it was funny because he'd, ask questions and be like, what about this thing about ADUs? And he's like, anyone but Brian can answer. And it was like almost like a running joke where I saw him like probably like 10 to 12 different meetups over the next like year. And that started happening. And come later on, down the road, he was actually the CEO of the company that I worked for from 2022 until about March of 2025. So yeah, that's kind of, that moment was just realizing that there's so much intrinsic value in doing something that other people don't want to do, whether it's hard or not. It's a matter of just time and just, most people probably think that it's super boring reading pages and pages of municipal code. I thought it was a puzzle. I thought it was a game. And yeah, and it showed in the value. That property, that land that we bought it for $420. And then a year and a half later, without even having full permits on it, we sold for $1,050,000. So it was crazy. Like my world exploded and I've been in it ever since.
So you guys didn't even end up building that, correct? It sounds like you
Nope.
just kind of sold the land with the plans.
Yeah. So our intention, what it was 2 lots that were right next to each other. And so we were going through permits for 4 units on each. Our intention was to sell one of the lots because we saw values go up significantly in the market because of COVID and everything and the ability to double the unit count. So we were going to sell one, use that money to finance the other. We realized through this process that when you submit a plan set to the city to get it permitted, we submitted only one plan set. So we went through a permit for 8 units. We couldn't split the permit and, build 4 and build 4. We would have had to essentially restart the permitting process, which would have taken us, a lot longer. We were going to sell this land. We were in escrow for 1 lot. And we were like, well, actually, we're probably going to sell the second one now too because of this issue. And he introduced me just to somebody who was doing like 1031 exchanges, which is where, a tax benefit for selling a property and being able to, defer taxes on it. And so I was like, oh, hey, like, I'm selling a piece of land right now. I'm probably going to, need to talk to you, man. Like, it'd be interesting to jump on a call or something after this. And he's like, oh, cool. Like, where are you selling it at? And I was like, oh, in like Logan Heights. And he's like, oh, over on like Martin. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's Martin Avenue. Like, he's like, yeah, I'm in escrow. I'm buying that. And I'm like, what? Like he was literally, he's the buyer of this land that I had. And so I was like, well, I mean, we're actually going to look at selling the other one. Would you want to buy the other one? And sure enough, he was like, yeah, probably. He ended up, they had a fund that they were buying like multiple development projects in. And yeah, so we ended up, we were in escrow for $550 on the one parcel, ended up selling both for $1,050,000. So we got a little bit of a discount for buying both. And we were able to 1031 that into several other properties, got our booties whipped on those a little bit, learning the difference between getting land entitled and 13 units of renovation at the same time. And yeah, continue going on from there.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing those stories. Why do you think ADUs are one of the smartest plays in today's market and in the San Diego market?
So ADUs are an extremely unique thing because you're able to leverage existing land, which right now in the market, the most expensive things are holding costs and acquisition costs. So by having a property that you have already owned or that you can leverage, you're not buying new land, you're leveraging existing space. The cost basis is going to be significantly lower to build it versus what you could buy at. And it all around, it's so legislatively friendly right now with it that pretty much every property is underdeveloped. So there's a very unique time in the market where it's an expanding asset class because more and more places are adopting ADUs. The legislation is becoming more and more forgiving and also easier to do. Not easy still, but easier than it was 5-10 years ago. And it's something where pretty much everyone can do it. And I think that it's really, really powerful. And it's not, I wouldn't say like ADUs are specifically the play. What it is it's an additional way to get density and increase value of a property and cash flow on a property that wouldn't have otherwise penciled. So you can now make more deals work because of it.
That's great. You've been involved and overseen over 500 projects. What's the one that you're most proud of?
Yeah, I have a project. It is a 4-unit project in San Diego, a super nice neighborhood. And the reason that I like it is because it was kind of this transition period where at the very beginning of this bonus ADU program in San Diego, they accidentally incentivized density, not quality density. And what that means is the way that they incentivized it was the more units you built and the smaller the units were, the more it cash flowed on paper. And so the more money you made. So they did this in a way, and there was unlimited density. So if you had, for example, 2,000 square feet that you were allowed to build, you could build 2,000 square foot units, or you could build 10 200 square foot units. And so a lot of people were doing these super small micro units, and I was one of them. I had have a project that I just sold that was 8 units, and they were all studios and 1-bedrooms. And there's a lot of projects that are significantly more units than that and in that size range. And we started to see, because it was kind of like the Wild West, and there were all these people that have never been a developer starting to be developers. And so they didn't know what was valuable to the tenant base. They had no basis to kind of make some of these assumptions. All they saw was the cash flow on paper because they assumed no vacancy. They assumed, whatever Joe Schmo down the street rented it for, who had parking and amenities and open space and a beautiful top bedroom unit. My studio on the bottom floor with no parking and 10 other units shoved in is going to rent out exactly the same. Which is not the case, not always the case. And we, going through this, we saw this density kind of issue happen. And I bought this property that we could have put 8 units on it. Super easy. Incredibly easy. And I actually was kind of leaning towards that direction, but my partner on it, who's actually now my partner on HK Development, he started, we were having conversations, and we kind of, we're going back and forth, and we got to the point where we're like, okay, let's do 4 units on this thing. And so it was the first time that I had exercised restraint in density doing a build. And to this day, best project I own, it appraised at the highest value that I think we could have gotten for what we built. And that's where the shift went from not what is the highest density, what is the highest value that I can create. And that was, I think, the best use case and kind of this, I guess, turning point in my career where I've become significantly, I believe, more intentional with what I'm building, how I'm building it, and, thinking about the end user, not just the spreadsheet. And it's changed the game for me. And so that one we still own today. We had, all in at like 1.5, it praised at like 2.2. So super, super beautiful build. And yeah, hopefully we're going to hold on to that thing for a long time.
Yeah, I like to hear all these kind of learning lessons that you're going throughout this journey of, building ADUs and trying to cram as many people and as many units in, and eventually you figuring out, hey, that might not be the best way to go, not only for the customer, but also for your profit as well. What are some of the biggest mistakes that investors or homeowners make when they try to build ADUs on their own?
So when people try and build ADUs on their own, what they do is they skip a step. They skip feasibility. Feasibility is broken down. I break it down into 2 stages. It's physical feasibility and financial feasibility. Physical feasibility has 2 parts. It has what I call online feasibility, which is where you're checking for the zoning, you're checking for how high you can build, how much you're allowed to build. You're checking if there's easements, if there's, floodplain, or if it's a flood zone, all these things that just on any property that is designated the same zoning as yours or wherever your property is located, what could prevent the project from getting built. The second part of physical feasibility is what I call on-site feasibility. So now you have the rules, the lines you're allowed to color inside of for what you can build. Now let's go check out your site and actually see what physically can get there. It's, if you're allowed to put 8 units on the property, but you have a 45% slope in the backyard, you're not putting anything on that thing. If you have no access or you aren't able to get parking back there, you probably aren't going to want to max out the unit count because you aren't going to be able to get parking, etc. So doing those 2 things, and then checking the financial feasibility. So making sure that you understand, hey, how much is this actually going to cost? Does this make sense to actually build? How am I going to get it financed? How much money am I going to build? I get asked all the time how to finance a project. And I tell people it's different. It's different on your financial situation. It depends on the project you're building. It depends on how much equity you have. So figuring that out, and then you take all 3 of those and you kind of massage them together to get to to a scope of work that makes sense for the build. And a lot of people will call me. So many people have called me over the past 5 years and said, hey, I have this property. What can I do on it? And I look at them and I'm like, you bought a terrible property, or you've owned a property that is just not conducive to real estate development. And it's very hard for some of these people to understand that. I'm like, man, I wish you would have called me like 2 weeks ago before you closed. Or I tell other ones who call me and their lot is, they've owned it for 10, 15 years, but it's not really conducive to real estate development. I tell them, honestly, dude, like, if you actually are doing this as an investment, you should sell this property and put it into a property that now is getting looked at as something that's conducive to ADUs. Because when you bought that thing, it wasn't a thing. So skipping that step, skipping the feasibility stage has absolutely ruined projects. I mean, like, to the extent, and to the company that I worked at was created because the guy or the CEO was doing an ADU for his dad pre-2020, and he got it drawn. The designer said, yeah, give me $3,000, I'll draw it. And they said, oh, by the way, it's going to be $5,000 to get the structural engineer to draw his plans. And oh, by the way, we have to do a soil study. And then, $20,000 into the process, 6 months into the process, they submitted to the city, and the city said, hey, you're not allowed to build here. And so he wasted $20,000, 6 months, and it was infeasible. So he's the perfect use case. And that's kind of like why he created this company, because he was like, he wanted to demystify this and give people it up front. So I call myself like a professional Band-Aid ripper. I tell people like all day long, I'll tell them like, dude, your project is like, I would not build this, or like, whatever it is. So yeah, that's probably, you can do a lot of things wrong. I've done a lot of things wrong on some of my projects, But because I knew that I could do it and I knew that it financially made sense and there was a big margin in there for me to mess up, even the projects that I have royally screwed up, we still made money on.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that. You have a system that you call feasibility design permit and build process. Can you go over that for our listeners and kind of break down each step?
Yeah. So in development, those at a high level are the phases. Whether you're doing a single unit or you're doing 25 units, you make sure it's allowed, right? You make sure that it makes sense and can and should be built, both physically, financially. And then you have to draw it, right? So you have to take that idea of what you have in your head and you have to put it a pen to paper. And then once it's drawn, you're now giving it to the city to make sure that they actually give you permission to build it. It can look extremely different whether you're in, I've had buddies who live in Idaho and they'll draw something on basically the back of a napkin and go to the city and the city's like, yep, looks good. Go ahead, build it. And then in, city of San Diego or California, I had a project that, a lot of things went wrong, but three years in the process to get permits. Very different, but functionally it's the same. You're getting the city to give you permission to build it. And then from there, you actually build it. So feasibility, design, permit, build. Once you're done building it, you can lease it, you can sell it, you can hold on to it, whatever it is. But at a core level, that is the entire development process. My very easy cheat sheet to kind of know what phase you're in and what you need to do to get it to the finish line.
Very nice. If someone's looking to actually purchase the property to do this development, where would that purchase fit into that equation? Would that happen after you do a preliminary search on the permit and if it's able to build on there?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So that would all be done in the feasibility stage. So very similar, I guess another term you can use is due diligence. So a lot of people know when they're buying a property, they have a due diligence period. That's a period where if you ever talk to an underwriter, they'll probably tell you they've underwritten 1,000 deals, this month, and it's because not every deal has the same level of intensity of underwriting. Where if I look at a deal on the market and I say, okay, well, fronts are that, you're buying it for this, like, oh no, that doesn't make sense. You technically underwrote that. You looked at the cost and the rents and you just didn't go do a deep dive and look at cash flows and IRRs and, more extensive returns. But at a core level, that's what you're doing. So for me, I have, a level of due diligence that I do in the period before I actually purchase a property that ensures that the project, within a shadow of a doubt can be done. I'll never be 100% confident on any project. No one ever will. There's always stuff that can come up. Same with cost. Like if any contractor says, oh yeah, I'll build it for this, and they don't put a guarantee behind that price, which they never will. They don't know, right? They're talking out of their butt because they don't know. For me, I look at that and really focus on making sure that the deal can get done. Right? Like it's probably going to be a little bit more than I think. It's probably going to take a little bit longer, but that feasibility stage before I purchase is like, can this deal get done? And then from there, for example, something called a boundary survey, where you measure the actual lot lines to make sure that you understand the exact square footage that you have on the property, because how much you're allowed to build on the property is based on that number. So a really good example of when it may, because there's no single answer, which is to kind of give you a very long-winded way of saying this. A boundary survey, if I was on a lot, for example, that was 7,489 square feet, so just under 7,500 square feet, and we were allowed 1 unit per 3,000 square feet, that means that if we were at 7,500 square feet on the dot, we're allowed to do 3 units on the property. If it's under 7,500, because it rounds up at half, if we were under 7,500, we would not be allowed to build a 3rd unit. So let's say it's 7,501, right? So I'm underwriting and saying, cool, I can build 3 units on this thing. A lot of times the exact lot size, once it gets measured, if it's, a quarter of an inch, in, it potentially could put it at 74.99, and all of a sudden we wouldn't be able to do a 3rd unit. So that would be an example where I would have to go deeper into the due diligence in the acquisition phase, because it might not make sense if I can't build that 3rd unit. If the lot was 8,500 and I knew for a fact, it's like, hey, like it's for sure, like I can build 3 units, then I wouldn't do that until after I purchase because it's not urgent. But it's really, that's kind of where going back to the checklist thing, I've built a fairly comprehensive checklist over the past 5 years of seeing like 500 learning lessons of projects, and then all my own projects at the same time. And so I have a pretty extensive checklist of all the things that I go through. And if I can say very confidently, like, no, this isn't going to be an issue, then it's not urgent. But if something I flag and I'm like, oh, it's right at this precipice, we need to get a boundary survey before we close. Otherwise I can't confirm. That's how we're able to identify. So that's kind of the main way, is just a huge checklist, paired with the experience is how I do it. But yeah, I mean, like, just the checklist, you're going to be ahead of 97% of people who do an ADU project. So
That's great stuff. Kind of switching gears a little bit, can you tell us can you tell us about HK Development, how it got started, and like what the vision was for that company?
yeah, so HK Development is, for all intents and purposes, our fulfillment branch of what I do. So I help people build ADUs better. That's what I do. I can do it through education. So I have a course and a community teaching ADU development. And then HK Development is our fulfillment branch. So if somebody says, hey, I know ADUs make sense, I have money to do it, or I have a property that I want to do an ADU on, but I don't have the experience and I don't have the time to actually go through the learning process, can you help me? That is where they're able to leverage. I would argue I have a pretty unique background and experience of just seeing so many projects in this ADU space. And so what we do is we allow them to leverage our experience, either as to manage their project or to actually partner with them on their properties. Or if they, for example, if they have a 1031 and they're like, I need to buy a project, I want to do development, but I have 2 weeks to find a property, or, whatever, and I have no idea how to underwrite a deal to begin with. They're able to leverage our experience, and we can come in, and the experience, the, costly mistakes that, I have projects that I've literally lost $250,000 getting to permits because of the mistakes. They're able to leverage that, still get into the ADU game, and be able to, reap the benefits of that. So that's kind of what HK Development was created as, is a way for us to let other people, or bring other people into our experience, reap the benefits of ADU development, because there is a lot of, benefits from investment and tax purposes in real estate development. And yeah, that's kind of the main core function. We have, a couple different ways we're able to do that, but essentially if someone's got a property or money and they want to get into the ADU game, like, there's a way we can help them.
And is that only in the San Diego area?
So HK Development, yes, that is where right now we are very, very confident in San Diego. And our experience can be leveraged to reduce a lot of risks that come from lack of experience in ADU development or real estate development as a whole, in San Diego and the Southern California market. For the other side, which is the builder nation, which is the education side, we talked about it at a high level. The process of development, it's very similar wherever you're at. So that side is much more robust in the areas and the people we can help. And so that's kind of why I created that, is because it allows me to have a much higher reach of being able to help people learn the process, avoid the mistakes, and avoid a lot of the issues. And then if they want to get into the San Diego or, Southern California markets, that's where HK Development is able to help out.
Now, you've built a personal brand as the Builder Brian. Can you talk about that name, how it came about, and what it really symbolizes for you and your outlook moving forward?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. I always joke. I'm like people love alliterations. So that's kind of, at a super high level, that's, one day I was just like, oh, the Builder Brian, that makes sense. And so that's kind of what I changed my Instagram to, because I had a personal Instagram, but I had this issue of, I think, self-doubt of not wanting to post things. I'm like, people don't want to see my stuff or whatever. My buddy Mark, he ended up like telling me, he's like, just start a second page. And I was like, oh yeah, I could do that. So I started the second page. That's when I started the Builder Brian name, because I needed a handle for it. And yeah, it kind of grew from there, being able to just continue helping people. And and I'm still figuring it out, right? Like I don't think you ever, finish a personal brand. It's something that you just continue growing as a person. But yeah, it's just been my way to really continue helping people, I think, learn the ADU and real estate development process. And I'm happy right now with that being kind of what I'm known for. The builder part of it, the builder nation, the builder Brian, et cetera, that is something where right now the value that I can truly clearly provide to people is helping them do real estate development and ADUs better. But long term, I mean, the whole point is like, I want to help people build good lives, build better lives. So, they're building. You're never done building. You can finish an ADU project, but you still have other areas of your life that you need to improve on. You're building relationships, you're building wealth, you're building all these things. And so long term, that's kind of where the whole brand and vision is to go, is just helping people build better lives, leveraging real estate development as the wealth building tool. So that's kind of long term, the vision for it.
I love that. I love that you're helping people get to where they want to get, and you're also, doing what you have to do to have your business thrive and be successful. So that's a great win-win for everybody there. What are some creative financing strategies that people can use for ADU or building projects?
Ooh, that is a good question. So we kind of mentioned it before, I get asked a lot, how do you finance an ADU? And I always tell them it depends, because there's some triggers or some levers that you can pull. So the size of the project matters, the how much equity you have matters, the amount that how much equity, the amount that you're building, and then kind of your own financial situation are the three main levers that kind of trigger how you're going to finance a project. So for me, for example, when you're in the military, you don't make a ton of money. So I had to get pretty scrappy for my first several projects. So I have ones that, I used an owner occupied loan into a construction loan because I was going through permitting for enough units that I was able to leverage a construction loan. I have other ones where my partner used his owner occupied loan, and then we raised private money as a second position to build out the units. And then we refinance into a DSCR loan after, which is, just based on rents. And then I have other ones where we had, 70% hard money finance with 100% construction or 100% renovation on the existing 4 units. We had 20% seller finance, and then we came down with 10% as a 1031 exchange, money. So all of that to say, there's a ton of different ways. I have another one that, I pulled out $50,000 of business loans and $50,000 of business credit cards to finance the down payment on it, or some of the costs on that. So there's a ton of different ways. I think those are some of the, but you have to be able to look at the traditional, the non-traditional, and then the more innovative ways inside of it. And this is like, it's definitely something where, it's easy to kind of look through those and understand at a high level. But then where the real sauce comes in is like being able to realize and take all of those and mix them together to make the deal work. So that's where, it really just depends on what you're building. If you're building a smaller project, I think the more innovative, scrappy ways than, innovative and non-traditional ways are probably going to be the better way, because it's probably going to be a little cheaper. Where if you're doing a bigger project, you're probably going to have to lean towards more of that traditional side, and then that, non-traditional, like private money side as well, to fill the gaps. So it all depends. It's kind of a spectrum.
That's great. Thank you for sharing some of those different options and different ways to look at it. Switching gears one more time, this is something we like to talk about on the show a lot, is artificial intelligence. What are some things that you're using AI for in your business, or have used in your business in the past?
Yeah, so right now, a little bit of, going back a tiny bit, I quit my job about 6 months ago to start my own company, which is what we've been talking about today. And so a lot of that has been building out what I would call the tech stack, right? So all the different platforms we're using, all the different things we're doing. And so in my business, there's a lot of content creation, there's a lot of filming and editing and, posting. And then on the fulfillment side of HK development, there's a lot of very minute, repetitive tasks that happen. So document storage, email responding, things like that. And so right now we really leverage it for content creation. So from scripting videos to creating newsletters to putting out content, there's a lot of, automation that we use there. But then the next part of this is where, now that we kind of have the foundation there, it's really going to be to supercharge what we're doing by leveraging some sort of automation platform like N8N. And it's a very simple process, not easy, but but simple, of setting up automations for, X email comes in from the architect. It's going to read whatever comes in from them and say, oh, this is an invoice. That invoice needs to then get stored here. We need to then log it in QuickBooks. We need to then take that and put it into, Google Drive. And then we need to pay the invoice. And then you need to approve it in order for me to send it. And essentially like 90% of like what you do as a developer is a very tedious, repetitive task. And so that's the next stage that I'm leveraging is like our experience and our, my experience in managing development and taking that, creating that for ourselves, solving our own problems selfishly first. And then from there, taking that and opening up to the masses, because I've realized that so many people can be a developer now without the experience of a developer because of this ADU thing. So if I can take 99% of what we do and put it in the hands of somebody else and say, oh, hey, you're at this stage. You got this email. Do you want me to do this thing that Brian does with his projects for your project? And then as easy as a simple button press. That's how really I think, the vision is to empower people to build real estate. And that I think is the best way to do it, is by giving them as much experience of myself and the people around me as I can. And that's kind of how we're doing it in our next phase of business growth is the automation and setting up the software to be able to do that.
Thanks for sharing that. That's great stuff. Great stuff for our listeners to really think about. If there's any type of processes or systems that are very repetitive, try to start to think of how you can get AI to do some of those things. As always, on the RealPropPro podcast, we're giving away a free real estate investment book. To enter, all you need to do is subscribe to the channel and comment which book you would like. We'll pick one lucky winner 7 days after the air date. So here are some of the options that we're giving away. We have The Go-Giver, Leaders Eat Last, Rich Dad Poor Dad, which was mentioned in the show, E-Myth, and Multifamily Millionaire. Brian's story shows that you don't have to start big to make a big impact. One deal, in his case a fourplex, can change the course of your life if you approach it with discipline and commitment. Whether it's ADUs, flips, or multifamily, the lessons here are the same. Start where you are, build step by step, and let momentum carry you forward. And remember, the communities we invest in not only need the housing as much as we need the financial freedom. When we do it right, we can create both. Brian, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your insights.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I hope it gives some value to some of you guys.
So for our listeners, if they want to connect with you, how can they find you?
Yeah, the best way on Instagram, The Builder Brian. Hit me up there, and yeah, if you ever think about doing an ADU project or anything in that space, I definitely have a way I can help you out.
Great, and to all of you tuning in, thank you for listening. If you found any value in today's episodes, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share with someone who's ready to take action in their own real estate journey. We'll catch you on the next one.